Thanks for the intro. And yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about seed saving today. It's kind of, it's kind of a something of a lost art, I suppose. But it's not a challenging thing to do, and it can be very rewarding to have your own seed stock that you kind of save every year and that you're planting back in your garden. Sometimes those varieties, they can carry some stories with them and that kind of thing. So there's value absolutely in doing that. So and then too, nowadays it's just so easy to go to the store and buy so many different varieties of seeds. Um, but there is something special about having your own that you saved year after year. So let's see. Hey, I'm Jacob Williams. I guess I introduced myself a little bit. I'm the up in Union and Towns counties, up in the mountains. I'm the county extension coordinator for both those counties up here. I'm also the ag agent for those counties too. This presentation was made a few years ago. Uh, Becky Griffin, some of y'all may be familiar with her. She put together a team, and I was one of the people on it. We made a publication for the extension website on seed saving, and then they also made this slide set kind of as part of that. So that's kind of what you're seeing on that first slide right there. So why do we want to save seeds? Preserving that biodiversity. There's a lot of uh, over time we do lose biodiversity just as uh, if you only buy, produce from the store, then you would see that there's, fewer and fewer varieties over the decades that are available, like at grocery stores and that kind of thing. So saving seed can be a way to kind of help preserve this genetic variation that we have out there. Seed sharing can be a really popular, fun community event. Get lots of people together and swap seeds around and that kind of thing. Can be a good way to meet other gardeners in your community. It'll save money. You're not having to go to the store and buy the seed. So there's some savings there as well. I talked a little bit about that cultural traditions. Just kind of that heritage of maintaining some of those old varieties of seed. Where I am in Union County, there's one farmer. He doesn't plant a lot of it every year, but he has some seeds that are probably or variety, I should say, that's probably almost 200 years old of some corn that gets planted every year. It came from when the European settlers first started showing up in Union County, which was in like the 1830s. So that stuff's like almost 200 years old, and he preserves that every year. So I think there is value to that, value to kind of holding on to that heritage as well. It's also a great exercise in botany. So if you're interested in learning about plants or you're teaching kids, this is a great hands-on way to kind of learn about plants and how they reproduce and that sort of thing as well. So which seeds should you save? Heirloom seeds. So this, generally when I say heirloom, I'm talking about varieties that are at least 50 years old, or open pollinated varieties. I'll talk a little bit more about what open pollinated varieties means. They're a lot easier to save. So if you're just getting started, it's a lot easier to save open pollinated varieties. When we're saving, we don't want to save anything that has disease or insect damage on it as well. We want to save the best of the best for the next year. And if it was a plant that you didn't like, well then don't save the seed from it. Save the ones that you liked, save the ones that did well. Hybrids, we don't really want to save seed from hybrids. And if you went to the store, went to a big box store, any varieties you bought there most likely would be some kind of hybrid variety. Those are very, very difficult to save seed from, because just as the seed, that if you save seed from those plants and you planted it the following year, I would almost guarantee that the plants that came up would look very different. The fruit that was produced would look very different from what you had planted the year before, just because they're a hybrid, and so they kind of start to uh, lose some of those genetics kind of as you save seed from them. So some basic things, we'll kind of go through each of these in a little bit more detail. Knowing those plants' life cycles and pollination requirements is really important. Understanding plant isolation, so how much space you need to have spaced out in your garden so that these seeds will be viable for you to save. And learning, okay, when is the best time to harvest for seed? It is different when you would harvest for seed versus when you would harvest like beans to eat them. And then how to preserve or prepare and store those seeds as well. So knowing your plants, I kind of mentioned pollination a little bit earlier. Generally speaking, with plants, there's two main ways that they can pollinate. They can self-pollinate or they'll cross-pollinate. And so self-pollinating plants, these ones are going to be the easiest for you to save. If you're a newbie at this, I would encourage you to start with self-pollinating plants. This is going to be kind of the easiest place for you to get in with saving seed. You look at this picture on the left of this plant over here on the left. This is the reproductive organs of the plant there. These little yellow bits on the sides, that's the male part, and then in the center we have the female part. So basically that pollen is pollinating the female part so that it will reproduce seed. If so, self-pollination means that that plant, it doesn't need another plant to be able to do this. It can all be done on that one plant, that self-pollination. Some plants require cross-pollination to produce viable seed, to produce fruit. And so that makes it that's still possible, but it's going to make it a little bit harder to save seed from those. You have to do a little bit more work to save seed from in that type of situation. Those cross-pollinating plants, their pollen is being transported by wind, bird, insects, some wildlife, something like that, is carrying that pollen from one plant to the other plant. And so that's just going to make it a little bit harder to save because you have a lot more potential for mixing of varieties when you have that cross-pollination happening. So this this kind of gives us a little bit of understanding about that plant isolation. So if you look at these bush beans, they are self-pollinated, so they only need an isolation distance of 10 feet. What that means is that if you were planting bush beans and you had two different varieties of bush beans in your garden, you would need those varieties separated by at least 10 feet, a minimum of 10 feet, to avoid cross-pollination between them, so that they this bush bean, it is self-pollinated, so that distance is a lot less because it's relying on self-pollination. Something like spinach, it's wind pollinated. You can see that on this chart. It's wind pollinated, so that pollen is going to blow around a lot further, and so this makes it a lot more challenging to save seed from that. It's not impossible, but it's going to make it more difficult. You're going to need more space, a lot more space between different varieties of spinach. And when we're talking about like 3,200 feet, that's a pretty good way. So now we may not just be thinking about the spinach that you planted in your garden. We could be thinking about, does somebody down the street have some spinach planted as well? So we kind of start taking those things into consideration, which just makes it a little bit more difficult to save those seed, but not impossible. So the maturity, so when do we want to harvest the seeds from these? We have a couple of different terms here. Market maturity, so that means that's when you would pick it to eat it. So if you look at that picture on the right, those beans, they're ready to eat. That kind of the skin on that pod is kind of starting to shrink back a little bit, so it's starting to lose some moisture. So we know, okay, this is getting ready to eat. Those ones on the left, they're kind of they're very dry. They're starting to turn brown. You wouldn't want to eat those. They've gotten really hard. They're really past their peak for harvesting, but that's the ones that we're going to want to save for saving seed. For that plant for those seeds to mature and to be viable for reproduction, it takes some more time versus just that market maturity. All right, so how do we prepare and store these seeds? There's three main methods. I'll go through each of these methods with y'all. There's three main methods. So dry is probably one of the simplest. So if you're looking at just getting started, Beans are a great one to start with because they're dry, they're self-pollinated, makes them really easy to start with. Um, but the dry, wet seeds, so that means that the seeds kind of start wet, and you think of seeds like in a pumpkin if you've ever made a jack-o'-lantern around Halloween. You know, you dig those seeds out of the pumpkin and they're kind of wet and gooey. And then fermentation. Some seeds require some fermentation to be viable, and so that would be something like tomatoes. If you're kind of doing this as like a lesson or something like that, you know, a workshop with little kids or something, tomatoes are a great one to use because you can find tomatoes pretty much year round at the grocery store. So if you're like, hey, we're looking to do a little workshop, or you know, with your grandkids or with your kids at home, you know, you want to do this with them, tomatoes are a good option for that because you can, any time of year you can go find tomatoes and do a seed saving workshop with them. So some equipment that's really handy to have, glass jars and lids, you know, different sizes, rubber bands, paper plates. We don't want plastic, we want paper ones. Will kind of help wick away that moisture a little bit better. Sharpies, we want to keep things well labeled. A lot of the, you know, we have different varieties of the same species, and those can be really easy to get mixed up. So we want to make sure that those are nice and clearly labeled. We know what everything is. Old pillowcases, you can use those to kind of separate the shell from the plant seed, kind of get that debris off of it. And some desiccants as well. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's kind of a fancy word, but really we're just talking about like those little silica gel packets that, you know, when you get a new pair of shoes, or they're kind of sometimes in vitamin bottles, that, you know, those things that say do not eat. See there in the picture? That's all we're talking about there. You know, just, and that's kind of helps absorb the moisture, any excess moisture that could be after when you're storing those seeds. Plastic dish tubs, you know, strainers, these can be really helpful. Shallow pans can be helpful. Make sure they have a lip so that those seeds aren't escaping. A knife, spoon, scoops to help get those seeds out. A fan, that's going to help kind of keep that air flowing, keep that air moving, so that so that the seeds can dry down sufficiently. Coin envelopes can be helpful too if you have a lot of small seeds. Sometimes those coin envelopes can be nice, and those are usually paper as well, which helps kind of wick away that moisture a little bit better than something that was more breathable than something that's plastic. And seed screens, and so there's different, you know, so and that would be different sizes, different sieve size depending on the seed that you're using, and that could just help separate the seed from, you know, that plant material that we don't need. So again, we want to make sure that we're being really selective when we're saving. We don't want to save everything. Obviously, we really want to try to save the things that look the best. That's what we want to save. Anything that's diseased, you know, so it's kind of got some black or brown tissue on there, we're going to avoid that because a lot of the diseases can carry over on seed from year to year. So we want to make sure that we have clean seed. We want to make sure that the plants that we're saving the seed from are not plants that are just disease ridden either. If they've been on the ground, those plants, those seeds, they could have picked up, you know, some bacteria, something from the ground that we don't want to save for the next year either. Birds and weather, you know, we get birds come through, they can you know, start eating up all the plants, all the seeds that you're planning on saving. So keep an eye out for that. Weather as well could knock plants over, could knock pods on the ground. And so again, that, you know, those are the ones that we don't want to save. So keep those things in mind as well. And it's sometimes these, you know, you can save a little bit of seeds just along the way. You don't have to do them all at one time at the end of the season, but just as plants mature and those fruit reach that physiological maturity, you can just kind of be saving seed along the way. So it's not a big push like at the end of the season. You just kind of do it throughout the growing season, and making sure, again, that physiological maturity, we're saving them at the right time. So we'll kind of go through some dry seed savings. This example here is with snap beans. So again, we want to leave them on the plant until they show that physiological maturity. They're kind of nice and dry brown color. We want to make sure those seeds inside the shell are nice and dry as well. Again, disease-free seeds is what we're looking for. We want to separate those beans from the shell. So snapping peas, shelling peas out on the front porch, and then place those seeds on a labeled plate to allow them to dry down. We're going to put them in a nice dry location that is undisturbed. Once we've dried them down to a good dryness, we're gonna store them somewhere in an airtight container. Put a little desiccant in there with them as well. If you put them in a cool, dark place like a refrigerator, they can last for 3 to 4 years in there. If you have freezer space for them, they can last even longer. Ideally, we want a cool, dark place. And even if you don't have enough space in your fridge or your freezer, we really want a place that's not going to see a lot of temperature swings. So, like keeping them in your garage, storing seeds in your garage would not be a good idea. My garage during the day, it gets up to, I don't know, probably 100 degrees in there during the day, and then at night it cools off significantly. So we want a place that has a nice, consistent, ideally cool temperature, a dark place as well is what we're really looking for. And so then with the dry seeds, it's pretty simple. That's really all there is to it, and you can keep them for about 3 to 4 years, and keep planting them. Year after year, the germination rate will tend to drop year after year. So you ideally don't want to have to store seeds for too long. So, if you're storing them for 3 to 4 years, really ideally what you would do is that you store them and then the next year you plant them back and then you save again so that you're not using kind of seed that's 4 or 5 years old because your germination rate's going to be declining pretty significantly at that point. When we're saving wet seeds, so like from melons, pumpkins, things like that, so just keep in mind some of these can be difficult to open. So some of them have a really thick rind on them, so they can be hard to get into. So something like in this picture, a drill is being used to get inside that pumpkin. These ones we got to really make sure that they dry down sufficiently. So we want to have a nice fan blowing over them, keep the air moving over them. That's going to help dry them down. Stirring them, moving them around. So that's when you stir them, you're going to be kind of flipping the seeds over, so that we don't just have one side that's dry and the other side's wet. So we want to keep stirring them around, and that way they'll also dry more evenly as well. And that's going to help with the viability down the road. And then the steps after that be pretty similar to the dry seeds. Once you've got them dried down, it's just going to take a little bit longer to get them dried down. Once you've got them dried down, you can save them in a box in a fridge or a freezer space if you've got it. Fermentation. This process is a little bit unique, but not too complicated. Ideally, you want to save your best tomatoes, and you're going to peel those tomatoes and get the pulp out of them, and you're going to mix that pulp with water and put that in a jar. Put that like in a mason jar, and then cover that jar with like a cheesecloth is usually the easiest way to do it, with a rubber band holding that in place. And we're going to kind of wait a week, several days to a week, depends on the temperature. You're kind of waiting for that stinky smell, that fermentation smell. Once you start smelling that, you know that these seeds have fermented and that they're ready to be saved. And so all you got to do is just kind of remove that top layer of pulp and the floating seeds that are up there in the top. Rinse those seeds off, get the pulp off of them. And now we're going to spread them out on some paper and let them dry down. Keep them protected from the weather. Stir them, move them around so they get really nice and dry. And then you can kind of put them into your storage containers to keep like the other seeds as well. With storage containers, really, we want to make sure that we keep those seeds dry. We want to have like some plastic storage bags can work. Paper envelopes work well. Glass jars, they can also work. And saving them in a fridge and a freezer space, if you have that, that's the ideal place to store them. The temperature is going to be much more consistent somewhere like that. You can put them in a closet or cupboard as well if you have space like that. Airtight containers will, so we have those will make the seeds last a bit longer too. Um, Dry to 5 to 7% moisture content by weight. Um, and so one way that you can kind of it can be hard to say, well, how do I know when it's 5 to 7% moisture content? If it's really dry and hard seed, then it's probably there. You can kind of weigh them. If you have a scale that's accurate enough, you could do that. Weigh them initially and then weigh them as they dry down and see how much weight you've lost. That weight that's lost has been water weight. And so that kind of tells you what the moisture content of them would be. Yeah, and freezing them does help. Several degrees below freezing, so that can help extend the lifespan of those a lot too. So again, as I mentioned earlier, that viability, that germination rate is going to decrease the longer they're in storage. Different species, different varieties are going to have different rates of decline for their germination rate. So it's a good idea if you have a lot of seeds saved. It's a good idea to kind of periodically take some seeds out of storage and just do a little germ test with them. It's not a real hard thing to do. Get some wet paper plates, some wet paper towels. Keep those paper towels wet for 7 to 10 days with the seed inside of it, and you can do a germ test really easy to kind of see, okay, if these seeds are still viable or not. And that way, if you've had seeds kind of saved for a few years, you don't have to question, okay, I'm planning on planting these this spring. Well, before you go out and plant them a few weeks, do a germination check on them so you're not really guessing if those seeds are still viable or not at that point. Some things that can happen, temperature variation, that's going to affect the seed's viability. Moisture fluctuation, so if moisture gets in there, that can cause some seeds to start to germinate. So we want to keep that moisture consistent. Insects, so if there's any insects in the storage, bags or jars that you're using, they'll use those to eat. And so that affects them as well. Animal pests too. One year we were drying down some pumpkin seeds and a rat got into them and ate a lot of our giant pumpkin seeds. We do some giant pumpkins up here, and so that was pretty sad when that happened. We lost a lot of giant pumpkin seeds to a rat. So something to kind of be on the lookout for. Again, if you keep them in a place like a fridge or a freezer, it's a lot harder for a rodent to get in there. And that's also going to kind of help stop insect pests as well. If it's freezing temperatures, those insect pests are going to be not much of an issue in that situation. So different, like I mentioned, different species, different varieties will last for different amount of time. Some ones that if it's considered a long-lived seed, we're saying 5 years or more. In general, there are plants that can last that long. Medium-lived, 3 to 5 years, and then some shorter-lived ones as well. I want to say it's been a while since I looked, but I think like there's been a couple of seeds that have been found like from ancient Egypt, like in Pharaoh's tombs and that kind of thing. They found date seeds and palm tree seeds that they've planted that are thousands of years old that actually grew. Don't expect that from your save seed. That's kind of a more of a unique thing to have happen. So but keep in mind these seeds aren't going to last forever. So we want to save them, use them, and save some more. This chart just kind of goes into some more detail on the different expected lengths, how long these different seeds will last. All right, so just kind of summarize some of these things. Make sure you know your plants, know what you're looking for, understand the pollination. So is it self-pollinated, cross-pollinated? Look for viable seeds. Make sure if you are saving seed, make sure those plants are isolated so that you're not getting a weird mixture of different varieties, genetics in the seed that you're saving something that will be true to type. We don't want to save seed from hybrid plants. Looking for that physiological maturity. That's really a big key. That's really what we're looking for. We want to prepare and dry those seeds accordingly and then store them properly. Make sure you have everything labeled. These seeds, they'll all start to look the same. So you want to make sure that they're labeled, that you know what's what when you're saving these seeds. And so again, just kind of these are the folks who made this presentation. I'm going to show y'all a couple more things. Let me see if I can. Let me share this screen with y'all. All right, so this you should be able to see this now. This is our seed saving guide for that we wrote a few years ago. It's on the UGA Extension website. So if you just go to there and you search seed saving, this will pop up. And it just kind of goes through a lot of the same things that I've talked about already through a little bit more detail on some of these. So this is a really good place to kind of get started with seed saving. And then I would also share with y'all this book that I've had. If you're really serious about seed saving and it's something that you really want to get into, this book right here, see if you can see it, the Seed Garden. This is kind of like, I would say this is kind of like the Bible for seed saving. It does a really great job of explaining seed saving. And then the one thing that I really like about it is that it has these plant profiles. See if I can show you one. So this is a plant profile for glycine max, which is soybean or edamame. And so it has these profiles on a lot, like hundreds of different species, and kind of tells you specifically how to save all these different species. So if you're looking for more detail, this book would be what I would order one of these books, because I've used it several times. It's got a lot of great information in there. All right, so that's my talk on seed saving. See, we can maybe take some questions. If anybody's got any questions.
Thank you so much, Jacob.